Have you ever stumbled upon something so unexpected that, for a split second, the world around you seemed to stop breathing? It's not the kind of moment you can prepare for. It's the kind that sneaks up quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, and leaves you holding something that feels heavier than it looks. That's what happened to me. And even now, just remembering it, I can feel the same tightening in my chest, the same rush of questions I didn't have the courage to answer right away. It was a late afternoon, the kind where the sun stretches its golden fingers across the living room floor, catching on dust motes that dance in the stillness. My house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. I'd been tidying up after my granddaughter's weekend visit, folding blankets, picking up the trail of little things she always left behind, a hair tie on the coffee table, a scarf draped carelessly over the arm of the couch. Her laughter still seemed to linger in the air, like a song that had just ended. I moved into her room, the one she insists is hers even though she only stays here from time to time. The faint scent of her perfume, something light and sweet, clung to the air. I began smoothing the sheets, tucking the corners the way my own grandmother had taught me, when my hand brushed against something tucked between the mattress and the bed frame. At first, I thought it was just a folded magazine or a forgotten notebook, but when I pulled it out, my breath caught. It was an envelope. Old, slightly yellowed at the edges, with my granddaughter's name written on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. The paper felt soft, almost worn, as if it had been read many times before. I turned it over slowly, my fingertips tracing the sealed flap. The weight of it in my hand was strange, light, but somehow full of something that made the air in the room shift. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Why was it hidden? Why here? In this place, where she knows I clean and fuss over every detail. My mind began to race through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Was it from a friend, a teacher, someone she didn't want me, or anyone to know about? There was a kind of intimacy in the way the name was written, like whoever had sent it knew her in a way I didn't. That thought stung more than I expected. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the envelope still resting in my hands. For a moment, I felt the walls of the room close in, the sunlight dimming just slightly as a cloud passed over. It wasn't just paper and ink, it was a secret, and secrets in families have a way of planting themselves deep, growing roots that twist and tangle over time. I don't know how long I stayed like that, staring at the handwriting, listening to the quiet hum of the house. My fingers itched to open it, but a part of me hesitated, afraid of what I might find. Sometimes, knowing changes everything. Sometimes, it's easier to pretend you didn't see what you saw, but I couldn't unsee it. The question was already there, pressing against my mind, and I knew I wasn't going to let it go. If you had been in my place, holding that letter, feeling the weight of someone else's private words in your hands, would you have opened it? Or would you have left it where you found it, pretending nothing had happened? I'm still not sure which answer feels more right. I sat there for a long time, the envelope resting in my lap like it might burn a hole straight through the fabric of my skirt. The house was so still that every small sound felt louder, the creak of the old wooden floor beneath my feet, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, even the slow rhythm of my own breathing. I traced the edges of the paper again, my thumb brushing over the sealed flap, and wondered how many times my granddaughter's hands had done the same. Was this a letter she treasured, or one she feared? I thought about all the afternoons we'd spent together, laughing over cups of tea, sharing silly little stories about her day. She had always been so open with me, or at least, I had believed she was. But now, sitting there with this hidden envelope, I started to realize that maybe there were entire parts of her life I had never truly seen. That thought hurt more than I wanted to admit. I placed the letter on the nightstand and stood, pacing slowly around the room. My eyes scanned her belongings. The stack of books by the bed, the framed photos of her friends, the half-empty bottle of perfume. Everything seemed suddenly layered with meaning, as if each object might hold a clue. My mind began piecing together small moments from the past few months, the way she sometimes avoided my eyes when I asked certain questions, the nights she stayed up late with her phone clutched close, the long pauses before she'd answer me about where she'd been. Was it possible that this letter held the answer to all of that? Or was I simply building a story in my head because I couldn't stand the idea that she might have a secret she didn't trust me with? The doubt wrapped around me like a chill. I sat again and picked up the envelope. The handwriting was neat but had a certain rush to it, like the writer's emotions had been too strong to keep entirely under control. There was something almost trembling in the way her name curved across the front. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the faint ridge of the paper inside. My curiosity was warring with my fear. Once I opened it, there would be no going back. The thought made me remember something from my own youth. A letter I once kept hidden from my parents, one that had changed the way I saw myself forever. For a moment, I was no longer the grandmother standing in her granddaughter's room. I was that young girl again, clutching a secret and wondering if the world would feel the same once it was spoken aloud. I glanced toward the window. Outside, the sky was shifting, the warm gold of late afternoon fading into the cool blue of evening. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the low hum of a car passing. It felt like time was slowing, waiting for me to decide. I slipped my finger under the sealed flap and paused. The paper crackled softly, like it knew it was about to give away something it had been guarding for far too long. My pulse quickened. The question rose again in my mind, not just about what was inside, but about why it had been hidden from me. And deep down, I already knew. Once I read it, there would be no unreading it. The envelope gave way with a quiet tear, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness of the room. My hands trembled as I pulled out the folded sheet of paper, its edges worn as if it had been opened and closed many times before. The ink was slightly smudged in places, the kind of smudge that comes from a fingertip brushing against words, too heavy to read without touching. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the first few lines, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. The handwriting was familiar, but not hers. It was stronger, bolder, with a certain weight to each stroke, like every letter carried a piece of the writer's heart. My eyes moved over the words slowly, almost afraid to let them sink in too fast. At first, it seemed like an ordinary letter, a warm greeting, a mention of how much the writer missed her. But then, the tone shifted. The words deepened, grew more vulnerable, more desperate. They spoke of nights spent awake, thinking of her, of things left unsaid, of moments stolen in the quiet where no one else could see. A shiver ran through me, not from cold, but from recognition. I could feel the emotion between the lines, the kind that leaves no room for pretense, the kind that changes people. I reached the middle of the page and stopped. My chest tightened as I read a sentence that felt like it carried the weight of everything. If they ever find out, everything will change. I leaned back in the chair, the paper still in my hand, my thoughts spinning. Who were they, and what exactly would change? I read on, unable to stop myself now. The letter painted a picture of secret meetings, whispered conversations, a bond so strong it felt dangerous to speak of it out loud. Every word seemed to breathe with tension, and the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just about affection. It was about something fragile, something the world outside might not understand. My heart ached for her, for the loneliness I could feel pulsing in these sentences. And yet, there was another ache too, the sting of knowing she hadn't told me, that she had chosen to keep this part of herself locked away. I closed my eyes for a moment, the image of her face flashing in my mind, her smile, her quick laugh, the way she always reached for my hand when we crossed the street. The words on the page were so far from that image, and yet they were hers, too. I lowered the letter into my lap, the silence pressing in around me. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever was written here, it was leading to something far bigger, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I sat there for a long moment, the letter resting loosely in my fingers, as if letting go of it would somehow make the truth inside disappear. But the words had already taken root in me, threading themselves through my thoughts like ivy finding cracks in an old wall. I could almost hear her footsteps in the hallway upstairs, light and unhurried, with no idea that I now held a piece of her world she hadn't meant for me to see. The air in the room felt heavier, carrying the faint scent of her perfume that lingered from the last time she sat here with me. I thought about walking upstairs, knocking softly on her door, and asking her outright, but the image of her startled eyes stopped me cold. I didn't want to see that flicker of fear, the kind that comes when someone realizes they've been found out. Instead, I unfolded the letter again, letting my eyes catch on a passage I had skimmed before. You make me feel like I'm not invisible anymore. The words struck me differently this time, as if I could feel the relief in them, the release of finally being seen. I remembered moments when she seemed far away, even when she was right in front of me, the dinners where she barely spoke, the way she sometimes looked at her phone with a softness that didn't belong to the conversation we were having. Questions swirled in my mind, each one chasing the other in circles. Who was this person writing to her? How long had this been going on? And most of all, why hadn't she told me? Was it because she didn't trust me, or because she was trying to protect me from something? The clock in the hallway ticked steadily, measuring the seconds while my thoughts raced ahead. I could almost hear the laughter from years ago, when she was small and carefree, running barefoot through my garden, her hair catching the sunlight. That little girl felt so far away now, replaced by someone carrying secrets too heavy for her age. A quiet resolve began to build in me. Whatever this was, I needed to understand it, not just for my sake, but for hers. The letter wasn't just a confession, it was a signal. A sign that something in her life had crossed into a place she couldn't navigate alone. I folded the paper with careful hands, as though the act itself demanded respect, and slipped it back into its envelope. My fingers lingered there for a moment, before I placed it in the drawer beside me. I told myself I'd decide what to do later, but in my heart, I knew there was no avoiding it. Some truths have a way of pulling you toward them, no matter how much you wish you could turn away. And I could feel this one pulling me already, slow, steady, and unstoppable. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the faint moonlight slipping through the curtains and painting pale shapes across the room. My mind kept replaying the words from that letter, each sentence echoing as if the walls themselves had memorized them. Outside, the crickets sang their steady chorus, but inside me, there was only the restless hum of unanswered questions. At one point, I thought I heard her moving in the hallway, light steps, a door creaking gently, then silence again. I held my breath, listening, wondering if she somehow sensed that something between us had shifted. I almost called her name, but something stopped me. Maybe the knowledge that once I spoke, I couldn't take the moment back. When morning came, the house felt too quiet, as if both of us were holding our breath. She sat at the table, hair still mussed from sleep, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I watched her for a long moment before joining her, studying the curve of her shoulders, the way she stared into the steam, as if it might give her answers. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, but there was a different texture to the air between us, a carefulness. Every smile felt measured, every word deliberate. And I realized she was hiding something just as much as I was now. She didn't know I had read the letter, but perhaps she could feel the weight of it in my gaze. At one point, she mentioned she might spend the afternoon in her room, working on something for school. Her tone was casual, but I could hear the thin thread of unease running beneath it. I nodded, pretending not to notice, but my thoughts were already reaching ahead, wondering if that something was another letter. Another piece of a story I had only just begun to glimpse. The day passed in fragments. I busied myself in the garden, pruning roses that didn't need pruning, simply to keep my hands moving. Every so often, I'd glance up toward her window, catching the faint shadow of her moving inside. She seemed smaller somehow, framed by the glass, like a figure in a painting, beautiful, distant, unreachable. By evening, the tension had woven itself into something tangible, something that clung to the walls. I found myself standing at her door, hand raised to knock, heart pounding, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped back, telling myself there would be a better moment, a gentler opening. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I waited too long, the truth might slip further away, hidden in more letters I'd never find, sealed in an envelope meant for someone else's eyes. The next morning, a thin mist clung to the garden, softening the edges of everything it touched. I stood by the kitchen window, watching it drift lazily over the grass, when I saw her emerge from the back door. She moved quietly, almost cautiously, as though she didn't want to be seen. In her hand, a folded piece of paper. My heart gave a sharp jolt. I stepped back from the window, careful not to let the floor creak, and watched from the shadow of the doorway. She crossed the yard, heading toward the old oak tree at the far edge of the property, the one with a hollow at its base that she used to use as a hiding spot when she was little. I could still remember her crouched there years ago, giggling, thinking she'd fooled me completely. But now, there was no giggle, no lightness, just a stillness in her movements, a quiet deliberation that made my pulse quicken. She knelt at the base of the tree, glancing over her shoulder once, then tucked the paper deep into the hollow, covering it with a small flat stone. My breath caught. I waited until she had gone back inside before slipping out the back door, each step toward the tree feeling heavier than the last. My fingers hesitated on the stone, cold and damp from the morning air. Part of me wanted to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but the pull of curiosity and the ache of worry was stronger. When I lifted the stone and reached into the hollow, my fingertips brushed the edge of the folded paper. It wasn't an envelope this time, just a page, creased and worn as though it had been unfolded and refolded many times. I opened it slowly, my eyes scanning the words. It wasn't from the same person as before. This handwriting was different, bolder, more hurried. The message was short, almost frantic. They can't know about us. Not yet. I promise I'll fix everything. The words made the air feel colder, the mist heavier. My mind raced with questions, each one darker than the last. Who was they and what, exactly, needed fixing? I stood there for a long time, the note trembling slightly in my hand. The oak tree, once just a piece of childhood memory, now felt like the keeper of a secret much bigger than either of us. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, feeling the weight of it as though it were made of stone. Inside, I could hear her moving about, humming faintly to herself, as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had shifted again. The first letter had opened a door. This one had made it impossible to close. That evening, the air inside the house felt heavier, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension I was carrying. I moved through the kitchen in silence, preparing a simple dinner, my hands going through the motions while my mind replayed the words from that second note over and over. Every clink of a dish, every sound of the knife against the cutting board seemed louder than usual. She came in quietly, her hair slightly damp, from a shower, smelling faintly of the lavender shampoo she'd used since she was a child. "Need any help, Grandma?" she asked, her tone light, almost casual. I glanced at her, searching her face for any sign of what she might be hiding. But her eyes were calm, too calm, like still water hiding a current beneath. I handed her the salad bowl, careful to keep my voice steady. "You can set the table, dear." She moved around the kitchen with ease, humming again. That same faint tune from the morning. It was the kind of melody you hum when you're trying to distract yourself, to keep your thoughts from getting too loud. When we sat down to eat, I noticed she barely touched her food. She pushed the lettuce around with her fork, glanced toward the window now and then, and smiled only when she caught me watching her. Each little gesture felt like another piece of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. Halfway through the meal, she spoke suddenly, as though deciding something in that moment. "I might be out tomorrow morning, just for a little while." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Anything special?" Her eyes flickered just for a second, before she smiled. "No, just errands, you know." But her tone was too light, and that flicker was enough to tell me it wasn't the truth. After dinner, she offered to wash the dishes, which I accepted, using the time to slip away to my room. I closed the door gently and took the note from my pocket, unfolding it again. Under the warm glow of the bedside lamp, the words seemed to pulse off the page, their urgency louder now in the stillness of the night. Somewhere in this house, my granddaughter was carrying a secret big enough for someone to write. They can't know about us, and I was beginning to realize I might not want to know the answer, but I was already too far in to turn back. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, the sky outside still a pale shade of gray. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every little sound, the creak of the floorboards under my feet, the soft hum of the refrigerator, even the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. I moved to the kitchen and put the kettle on, but my attention kept drifting toward the back window. Through the thin curtain, I caught a glimpse of movement. There she was, slipping out the back door with her jacket half-zipped, clutching something small in her hand. My chest tightened. I stayed still, hidden by the curtain, watching as she crossed the yard and disappeared beyond the trees, toward the old path that led to town. Without thinking, I grabbed my own coat and followed, keeping my distance, careful not to let the gravel crunch too loudly under my shoes. The morning air was crisp, carrying that damp smell of earth and leaves. I could see her ahead, moving quickly, glancing over her shoulder once, before turning down a narrow alley I hadn't walked through in years. At the end of the alley was the back entrance to the old post office, a place barely anyone used anymore. She paused there, looking around, and then slipped inside. I pressed myself against the corner of the wall, my breath shallow, waiting. A few minutes later, she emerged without the object she had been carrying, her face set in an expression I couldn't quite read, part relief, part worry. She walked back the way she'd come, and I let her go ahead far enough before following again. The whole way home, my mind buzzed with questions. What had she left there? Who was it meant for? And why did it feel like each step we took toward the house was bringing us deeper into something I couldn't control? When she stepped inside, she greeted me as if nothing had happened, her voice warm, her smile easy. But I could still see the faint flush in her cheeks, the way her hands lingered in her pockets a moment too long. I poured the tea, handed her a cup, and forced myself to act as though the morning had been ordinary. But in my pocket, the first note still sat folded, and now it was no longer just a secret. It was the beginning of a truth I wasn't sure either of us was ready to face. That night, long after she had gone to bed, I sat in the living room with only the soft light of the lamp spilling across the floor. The house felt different now, not unsafe, but charged. Like every shadow might be holding an answer I didn't yet have the courage to see. I reached for the small wooden box on the bookshelf, the one where I kept old letters, photographs, and bits of my past that I wasn't ready to let go of. I took out the folded note again, laying it flat on the table. My eyes traced the familiar handwriting, the curves and pressure of each word, until I could almost hear the voice behind it. They can't know about us. Just 6 words, but they held the weight of something bigger than I could guess. I thought about following her again tomorrow, about confronting her, asking the questions directly. But deep down, I knew the moment I asked, everything between us would change, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. As I sat there, I heard the faint creak of the stairs. My heart skipped. She appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, wearing her robe. "You're still up," she said softly, her eyes flickering to the table before meeting mine. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, my fingers subtly sliding the note back toward the box. She hesitated, then stepped into the room, sitting across from me. The silence between us stretched, not heavy, but full of things unspoken. "Grandma," she began, her voice low, "if you ever found out something about me, something you didn't understand, would you still love me?" The question hit me like a wave, sudden, cold, and impossible to ignore. I swallowed, my throat tight, and answered, "There's nothing in this world that could make me stop loving you." Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment, I thought she might tell me everything. But then she just smiled, faintly, reached for my hand, and whispered, "Good night." She left as quietly as she'd come, leaving me staring at the doorway, my hands still warm from her touch, and my heart certain that whatever this was, it was only the beginning. The next morning, the sunlight spilled through the curtains like nothing in the world had changed, but inside me, I knew it had. I moved through the kitchen preparing breakfast, yet every sound, every movement felt sharper, like my senses were tuned to something I couldn't name. She joined me at the table, her smile easy, her voice light, and for anyone looking in from the outside, it would have seemed like just another ordinary morning. But I could see it now, the way her eyes carried a weight she didn't share, the way her laughter seemed to float just above something deeper. I thought about the letter, about the unanswered questions, and I realized some truths aren't meant to be forced out before their time. Sometimes, love, whether it's between family or something more complicated, means holding space for someone's silence until they're ready to fill it. As she left for the day, I stood by the door watching her walk down the path, her figure growing smaller in the distance, and I knew that somewhere ahead, the moment would come when she'd let me in completely. Until then, I'd keep the letter safe, and keep my heart open, because secrets have a way of finding the light, and when they do, they change everything. And now, I want to know something from you. If you were in my place, standing there, with the truth in your hands but no answers yet, what would you do? Tell me where in the world you're watching from, because stories like this connect us no matter the distance. And if you felt even a little of what I felt in this story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next chapter. Something tells me it's coming sooner than you think.